that the challenge is when you make changes in your code, all of a sudden you break your preview, right? And I think you said in the talk that it's unfortunate that we're dependent on the preview working, but at the end of the day, I own it, so I can decide how it renders what I want to render, right?
That said, it really bothers me that when you break the preview, your app doesn't build. I don't think the preview should keep my app from building and running on a simulator. That feels wrong to me. And that's what causes a lot of people to comment out the preview is I'm trying to get work done here. And this thing that I don't even care about is it's supposed to be there to help me. And so if I have failing unit tests, that doesn't mean my app isn't building and running. It just means these tests are failing. I feel a preview should be like a unit test kind of thing for me. And so, yes, we own the preview, but I've got a lot of sympathy for people that say, oh my gosh, this should not be getting in my way.
Yeah, no, you're 100% agree. I 100% agree with that for sure.
The thing I try to do in my book is try to break it down into the pieces that made sense to me as individual things that I understand. And so the syntax of it, it was a big light bulb moment for me when I realized that Apple had emulated what they did with errors when they did that with the syntax for async await. And so if you think of async await as mirroring what we have already with throws and try,
Right. Yeah.
and the do try catch in the task, and you start to understand tasks, all of a sudden you've got the syntax down. And one of my worries is actually the syntax is beautiful, but it might be too nice because it's easy to read past a lot of complexity that's happening. And so every time I see an await, I want it to call to me. I want it to say, hey, there's a possible suspension point here. Because I remember the days when I was in Java, they introduced all the concurrency stuff there. And the guy that led that charge was Doug Lee. And Doug Lee is one of the smartest people on the planet. And he said, what's going to happen is those of you trying to do the right thing with concurrency are going to actually probably make your apps worse. And so what I like about async await is for the most part, it keeps us from doing that. And I know they told us that with Grand Central Dispatch, but this time they mean it.
Yeah, I think last year or 2 years ago, I guess when Async await, when did it come out? It was 2 years ago, right? That Async first showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So I called it, it was basically like automatic reference counting for concurrency. Would you agree with that? Like in terms of making it simpler to get your head around?
Yes, and I thought when Apple introduced Arc, that changed our lives.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years later that we talked about how one thing is invented for one situation. Like Arc was kind of invented for Swift, but we got it in Objective-C.
Right.
And
Oh,
so
really?
these things that are invented for one world that we benefit. Do you remember how messy it was to write arrays in Objective-C before they
Hmm.
were working on Swift?
And dictionaries too. Yeah.
And dictionaries, the syntax was awful
Yeah.
and ended with a nil.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then they came up with the literals, right? That would deal with half of the types of arrays you'd want to write, and very few of them
Like every other
dictionaries.
grown-up language.
Yeah. Yeah.